Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Jordan, Executive Director of the Business Civic Leadership Center. And
I'm Steve Rockland, Director of Accountability.
thank you. And for this week's podcast, what we want to talk about is the tragedy in Japan. In particular, we want to talk about what happens with the aid money and where it goes, and how do we start thinking about the accountability and governance of it. This has been an issue in previous disasters, especially when you have a situation where so many companies have responded so quickly. Obviously, the tragedy in Japan has been overwhelming. There've been untold numbers of people that have been displaced. On recent phone calls that we've had, there have been estimates of over 100,000 children alone, 500,000 people. We don't actually know the full extent of the death toll and of the damages that have been incurred. But by way of comparison, we think that this is worse than what the impact that Katrina had on the United States. So obviously, Steve, we have a situation where there's a huge concern about what's going on. Can you share with us a little bit about how companies should be thinking about their accountability and their governance, and the relationship that they should be thinking about vis-a-vis the aid agencies that they're working with?
Well, one of the things that I think we both find amazing is that whenever disasters like this happen, the incredible generosity of general citizens, employees of major companies, and the generosity of the companies themselves. And so maybe, there's been so many discouraging pieces of news. It seems to get worse every day. Maybe we can start by accentuating the positive. And I'd be interested to hear from you. What are you seeing from your members in terms of what companies are doing right now?
Well, this is the number one question that we get from the press. And right as of 5 p.m. March 18th, we are at $170 million in terms of corporate pledges and commitments, $127 million from U.S. companies alone. And this compares to Haiti in terms of that at this point, at a comparable point in response to Haiti, American companies had pledged $90 million. What's interesting is that the Chronicle of Philanthropy is saying that these numbers are lagging from Haiti, but I think that what happens with the Chronicle of Philanthropy is that they are talking about commitments and cash in the door, whereas our numbers are commitments and pledges, which means that companies say, I am going to spend up to $2 million or up to $3 million, but that doesn't mean that they've actually dispersed all of the money immediately. And so I think that's why you're seeing the discrepancy between the figures that we're getting, which are clearly ahead of Haiti, and the figures that are being reported in other philanthropic institutions.
Now, you and I are both concerned about what happens with this money and how it's used for the most effective response and recovery possible. And I know you have strong opinions about this. So all of this outpouring of money, where does it go? Where does it should go? Where does it should go?
Well, so there's several different pieces to this that we need to unpack. One is that I think it's been a mistake in some ways to focus just on the money in terms of how companies engage, because I think that in a lot of ways companies can actually contribute more by focusing on their expertise. And when you talk about cash, and you can walk through this better than I can, that's an input. Right, that's not about solving a problem or getting to an outcome. And I get concerned that you then set up a narrative where people are saying, oh, well, they gave all this money, where did it go? And whereas what I think we should be really starting to look at is what are the problems that are out there, and how are companies helping to address those problems. Why do you think that it's easier for people to talk about, just the inputs than it is to talk about, well, solving the problems in this space? Why does it seem like there's such a lack of focus on the end?
Yeah, it's funny. It's partly, I think it's cultural response that people want to focus on the charity, on doing something. Part of it's the immediacy of the effect. I know that you have views on this in terms of the immediacy of the response, when actually for many people it's a much longer term problem. And I think that we get caught in some traps here, which are very difficult, and I think very difficult for the response and development community overall. I hate to be the guy who comes in and acts like the scold, in a situation of just terrible tragedy and wonderful generosity.
Yeah.
But I'll play that role.
And you do it so well.
Thank you, thank you. I think that there has to be a conversation with each of these disasters, and certainly the statistics bear out that more are happening over the years for a variety of reasons, that we find that the confidence in development agencies, in aid and in response, is decreasing. So wonderful generosity, but that won't continue forever if people aren't certain that their resources are going to solve problems, as you're saying. So we have to concentrate on that side of it too, and I think that we have to watch it very carefully.
So I understand, and I know this is going to be a moving figure. We're in the high 50s right now in terms of companies that have cut $1 million checks already. That's a huge gift for any single company to do. And for many companies, this will probably be the single largest gift that they make at this time. What advice would you give to a company that is considering a large gift in terms of what are the questions to ask of the nonprofit? Like, what advice would you give about making the process accountable? Here, I'm going to give you $1 million. Before I give that nonprofit the $1 million, what do I ask them?
Well, I'm going to turn the tables on you on this question in a second, so be prepared. But I would say a few things. First of all, does that nonprofit have a clear plan of what it's going to do with that money and where it's going to go? Number two, does it have adequate governance bodies and oversight?
What is, in your mind, is adequate governance?
Well, I think they have to have some kind of independent oversight. And I also think that they have to have some publicly and on third-party independent audit report of how that money gets used. And I think they also have to have the same way that we ask companies to track their suppliers. I think these international nonprofits have to be able to say, our partners on the ground, we're able to audit and assess as well. It's not easy, but it's very important. I think that these organizations have to have a way of tracking what they're doing. There's a question that you and I may get into a debate about overhead. I think we're on the same page. I don't have a problem with certain overhead figures as long as that overhead is justified.
Right.
As long as it's overhead related to the delivery of what they're doing.
Right.
That's very important. So all of those things, I think, are some basic questions to ask around accountability.
So, Steve, one other piece to this. What advice would you give to companies? Are there agencies or bodies that are like watchdogs of relief or development? Is there a way to check before you make a major gift?
There's some that are beginning to emerge in the U.S. If you're looking globally, I think this Publish What You Fund organization, the International Aid Transparency Initiative, the NGO that's been very celebrated because of its celebrity, One, is very focused on this. I think all of these can be useful resources, and I think that there's